greet you all with the Islamic greeting of peace. Assalamu alaikum. Many people have supported us with this, but CagePrisoners, we are an organisation that has been running since 2003. Primarily, we deal with campaigning to close the prison camp at Guantanamo Bay. And later we will be having one of the ex-detainees discussing his experience, and Robert will be in conversation with him.
Good evening, everybody. It's a great privilege to be here tonight. I think this is obviously it's a very timely meeting, and our great good luck is to have Robert with us tonight when we want to discuss issues about imprisonment in the United States. This is a conversation between Robert and Omar Deghayes, who many of you know. And I'm just here to put a few themes forward that I hope they will bounce back between them. And later on you'll be able to ask them questions. So my first theme, my first idea is, one of the things you have in common is you were both imprisoned completely unjustly. And to what extent has that completely marked the way your prison experience was?
Yes, definitely being imprisoned does have lots of feelings that will carry on with you throughout your life. And being put in a prison without any, there was no chances to answer back any evidence. We didn't know even why we were kept in prison. And the problem in Guantanamo was that even the evidence against you were kept in secret. And the problem is we never were formally accused of committing something. We were just, they even created a term which is not normally a legal term. They created the term detainee to say that we're not prisoners, we're not non-prisoners. No, we've committed anything. No, we've been convicted of anything. And because of that, Guantanamo is probably very unique in that sense. It does, of course, have an effect. The injustice of it, yeah, definitely.
So, Robert, your experience was different in the sense that you knew why you were there, but the sense of injustice was also, I think, a very strong part of your experience.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. Yes, my experience in prison, probably wasn't any different. The impact or the effect of prison wasn't any different, and the thoughts about prison wasn't any different than Omar. But what prison did for me, it allowed me to put the judicial system in America in perspective, and subsequently I was able to put the American political system and the American establishment per se in perspective, because it was prison that allowed me to calculate and to make the connection that slavery still existed in the United States, contrary to what might be believed beyond the shores, on the shores by many. It allowed me to really make that connection that the 13th Amendment really did not abolish slavery in the United States, and that if you were convicted of a crime in the United States, you become a legal slave, and once you become a legal slave, you lose all rights, legal rights and freedom.
Maybe you could just tell people very briefly something about the length of time you spent in prison, which I think not everybody is completely aware of. And then maybe you can move on from that to talk about solitary confinement and how long you were in solitary.
Well, I was in solitary confinement closed cell restriction, as they call it. They have lots of euphemism in the States. But I was there for 29 years, and 31 total, but 29 in solitary confinement. And the cell was literally 6 by 9 by 12. There wasn't much you can do in a space like that. You allow yourself to become probably acclimated to short distances in order to really survive. But it was kind of hard because, you know, the mind is pretty broad, and the concept of freedom, and to be confined in such a small space and expected to acclimate yourself to that space, you have to some degree acclimate yourself, because you would perhaps go insane, and there are many things that can drive you insane. But the thought of being in prison, if you are in prison in Angola, or in the States, elsewhere, not just in Louisiana, but if you are there, if you have a life sentence, you have a life sentence without the possibility of parole, probation, or suspension of sentence. That means you are there for the remainder of your life. You get an hour out in the hallway, 23 hours a day, sometimes 24, because lots of time for security reason, and I use that in quotation, for security reason, they can preempt the yard. They can come on a chair and just shake the whole flat down and take a whole day, and it will take you a day. But being in solitary confinement, it wasn't a lot you can do. You can do a lot of thinking. At certain times, we were allowed certain books. There were different periods when we weren't allowed books. There were different administrations that came on the set, and some were, as we use the term, some were they were more loyal than others. In other words, they were better, quote, masters. We use that in the same form that the slave might use on a plantation, as if someone might come who was pretty benevolent. We would, point out that this slave master was pretty cool. But the concept of slavery in prison does not escape the prisoner, even if they're not politically conscious of what is going on.
Yeah, definitely, Victoria. When Robert spoke about, it's very strange that he spoke about slavery and how that came out in prison, because it's the same thing. That theme was there in Guantanamo too, even though we might think it's starkly different, but it's not. It's very, very similar when he speaks about the regime of racism and how it's institutionalized inside the judiciary and the guards and so on. When we were, for example, one of the things that we used to remember and talk about a lot, there was two parties inside Guantanamo, even within the prisoners themselves. One party of the prisoners were arguing all the time. They were saying we are actually slaves in this prison. We were bought like slaves. We were chained and brought here by chains, and we are now here in these cells. And what we have to do is, what we have to do is surrender completely to our fate, and we can't do anything against that. And this was a very strong group of people who used to advocate that, and they would give evidence sometimes from what they think is from other sides of things, and they would give evidence on those things. And the other argument was that we were the inspiration that we spoke about. So many other people would say, that's very wrong how to look at things like that. And we talked about slavery in the United States, and we mentioned that a lot. And we said, look, even in slaves in the United States, there were two. Even if this was the case, we were bought like slaves and we were chained like slaves, we brought to Guantanamo like slaves. But we will not. We will react differently. We will survive and we will resist. And we will not accept and we will not surrender. Like the slaves in the United States, there were two people, and we said this in prison. There were the people who didn't accept that, and they struggled hard to try to take their liberty back and to defend themselves and to survive. And there were other people who accepted it and became like Uncle Toms, we used to call them like that. And that's unacceptable. We will not surrender to these people. And this argument went on even with the guards, some of the guards, very few guards. In general, the black guards and the people from Puerto Rico were a lot lenient. They were more, kinder than the other guards. But we had this argument. Sometimes with the black guards, you'll have somebody who's filled in with the ideas and feel brainwashed that we are bad people and he wanted to serve the country. and do his duty and things like that. And we used to argue with him. We said, we can't imagine how you, especially you as a black man, fighting for this country, who probably your grandfather himself was chained like we were chained. And he was brought by boats like we were brought by boats in Taman. And if your grandfather was here to see this, you would be his enemy, not us. And he would commend what we were doing. We are surviving and we're trying to resist and not accept that. And this was something that made many of them think and soften up a bit and think about what the condition that we're in. So, so when Robert speaks about isolation, speaks about the judiciary and how it makes a difference between Guantanamo when it says if you're a US citizen, you would have certain rights and protections, but if you're not US citizens, they allow themselves to put you in a place where I call it offshore torture facilities. They're away from any laws because you're not a citizen of ours, and all that. The judiciary itself, the phobias against the other, whether it's black or whether it is Muslim or whether it's Jews or Irish and so on. It was always the history of the powerful people in the United States today is a bleak history, that how they abolished all the Red Indians from their lands and took their lands. It's something that all this does trigger out again and again in Guantanamo. And even, some of the interrogators used to say that. They used to say to us, listen, we bought you like slaves, and we brought you here. And the other interesting thing, I said this to Clive, who is our solicitor, our lawyer there, and I said to him, can you imagine, I was shocked for the first time to realize that the chains that I'm held in, because the way they hold the chains in Guantanamo is so different than any other chains. They have your hands, and then another part to the middle, and then the chain itself goes down all the way down to the legs, and then it chains you again to a third party to your middle. And I said, I was shocked to see it said made in England. The chains themselves are made in England. And I didn't believe that. I said, is there England in the United States, which is like they have Portsmouth and Brighton and other cities similar to here? He said, no. Clive said, no, it is England. It's Birmingham, England. And these same factories used to make these same chains, which used to be made for slaves a long time ago. And he said, we had a big demonstration in front of the factory with lots of members from the Birmingham community, and they were saying, because they were prisoners from Birmingham inside Guantanamo, and you're making chains for these people to chain your own locals. So
I'd like to just say a little bit more about the question of solitary. How did you organize your mind to pass that 29 years? What were the techniques that you used for yourself to keep yourself alive?
This is what it was like with me. I saw prison, and I was able to put it in perspective. And I think being able to put it in perspective, I saw actually what it did to people. I saw some people come to prison, come into a cell, a situation like we were, and within a matter of months, they succumbed, deeply into some, seemed like comatose, individuals. And looking at this, I think this kind of helped me to kind of make sure that, because I saw what they did to people who came to prison, and if they succumbed to prison, I saw what they did to them. If they thought they had any empathy or sympathy because they may have, gone, quote, berserk, there wasn't any sympathy at all, because they did more to, you became a floor mat not only for the administration, but for other prisoners as well. So this was, I think that was one of the only things that I was afraid of, to kind of go insane. And this would kept me from really going totally insane, because I saw what they did to other people, and I didn't want that to happen to me. Of course, there were other things that we did. We formed exercise. Since we were politically aware, politically conscious of what was going on, we wanted to kind of educate the population. They had taken us out and stripped us away from the man's prison population, but they had to feed us, and they had to bring inmates from other parts of the prison, and we were able to get written communiques out to other people. So we were able to sort of like kind of organized a little bit. And then it wasn't an organizing ground. Prison in the United States at that time wasn't an organizing ground simply because young blacks and poor people, especially blacks, were being sent to prison in droves. And so it was a good place for recruitment, especially when the Black Panther Party came on the set. It was sort of like simply because they were sending people to prison anyway, it became sort of like a recruiting ground for people who wanted to get off into the struggle. And many people who were in prison actually became members and empathizers or sympathizers of the struggle, and Black Panthers as well, as a result of being in central CCR or close to a restriction of being in solitary confinement. But we were able to, and even on the flatway we were on, and even though we were not allowed to come out together at this time, one person would come out in the hallway and get an hour in the hallway, and this person here would utilize that time to pass material to other people. Do whatever we were able to supplement and implement certain things, that ordinarily just did not occur in prison, because, even though we were in prison, it got to a point where they knew that we would, sometimes the squeak the wheel gets the grease. Now, sometimes it get eliminated, but if you squeak the wheel, sometimes you get grease, and sometimes they didn't want to hear the wheel squeak, and we squeaked a lot. Believe me, we squeaked a lot. So we got some things, and some amenities that we should not have gotten. But the idea was this: we wasn't trying to beautify a prison. Never was the concept to beautify a prison or to make prison palatable. The idea was to first and foremost get out of prison or make the environment conducive so that we could probably get books that they were denying us, law books and other books that we needed in order to pursue our case. And of course, yeah, we understand that the judicial system was rocky a little bit, but sometimes the door get open, and if you understand your case, if you learn pro se law, you can go back into court with a petition, and sometimes you can get hurt because you'll get an empathetic or sympathetic judge. So the idea was to just continue on and keep moving. Of course, this doesn't happen with everybody. Everybody don't have probably the intestinal the fortitude because they take it away from them. But some of us maintain that, and we were able to do it. And those of us that did, we were able to pass it on to other people.
Definitely isolation, as Robert was saying, it does drive anyone, any strong person to complete craziness and insanity. And it's very, you can see, we've seen many people just going inside isolation and coming out into complete crazy people inside one town. And that's why even in the, we know because in the Geneva Convention, in the laws of war, is that even if you wanted to, a captive, you wanted to imprison him in isolation, you can only imprison him to 30 days, and then he has to be released. And what the Americans have done inside Guantanamo Bay to abide by that, as I say, the spirit of that law, is they put you 30 days inside isolation, and then they take you out just half a day somewhere, and then take you back to isolation, and it continues for years and years. In my case, it went on for 4 years or 5 years like this. But to imagine like what Robert went through, I mean, many years, this is very difficult to imagine how a person can survive. Because I know that they had, Charles Dickens spoke about that I think there was in prisons in 1850 in South Carolina, where they had a system like that. And after 6 months, they found from their studies of this prison, the same authorities, American authorities who had that prison, said that within 6 months, any man put in such conditions will go crazy. The mind just starts to eat itself, because as Robert was saying, there's nothing to think about. You think until you just completely end up eating yourself. Your brains will eat itself. And because of that, they made it illegal. These prisons, they were private prisons set up in South Carolina, and they made them, outlawed them. They were illegal. And I don't know how, under what pretext, they're doing the same thing in Guantanamo, and they're doing the same thing to people in maximum prisons that, as we know, that people have been extradited to. We all know about the United Nations, recent Mondays, he spoke about how the US in prisons, the isolation in prisons are considered to be torture. And they are actually torture. As I say, I've seen big commanders. There's one man who was imprisoned in Guantanamo. He was an Afghani commander, a very old man. He used to fight against the Russians. And one of the things they said to him inside the interrogation is that how you were teaching people to use what they call them, those missiles, the Stinger missiles. And they said you were teaching people, how to use Stinger missiles against the Russians and so on. And he said, it was you who taught me how to use the Stinger missiles. And they dragged him, he's an old man, they dragged him down to Guantanamo, just I think for intelligence gathering rather than anything that he committed against the Americans. He was fighting against the Russians. And somebody like that, a strong man and somebody who has a history of fighting in the mountains, he just broke down inside isolation. And many, many others I know of, they did that until they, at the end what they've done is because of what the system that drives people crazy, they had the whole prison block called Echo Prison, where it was only kept for people who've gone insane, crazy. And they had locks, and like you have in any hospital in crazy, so definitely.
I think we could continue this conversation a very, very long time, but I'm just going to ask, at this point, you will have a chance to speak to them later. But I just want to say that one of the things that I admire so much about both of you is the way you've dedicated your lives and coming out to continue fighting for your two friends, the Angola two, who are still there, and in your case, above all, for Shaka, and for, of course, our friends who are now there. And I'd love you both just to say a little bit about the impetus that drives you to that.
Yeah. Do you want to start, Robert? Yeah, go on.
Thank you. Well, first and foremost, let me say this. Yes, what drives me is I always say, when I was in prison, if I ever got out, and I would do my best to get out, that I could not allow myself to come out and live a sedated lifestyle or a sedentary lifestyle, just not doing anything. I was in prison for a crime in which I hadn't committed. I could have accepted 7 years and a 15-year sentence and got out in 7 years. Instead, I did 31 years. It would have been for naught. So I felt, no way I would ever just come out, and just see what was going on in the world and not try to change it. And one thing I need to put in perspective is this. Of course, Herman and Albert are my primary focus in groups and people who I work with. They are our primary focus, but our vision is much broader because the problem goes beyond Herman and Albert. The problem goes beyond Louisiana. It goes beyond, the 50 states. It creeps to the borders of other countries, such as England. We understand that we have one common, a foe. We understand that same people who control Correction Corporation of America, these private entities of us, they're in cahoots with the American government. We also understand this, that in spite of all of these private corporations, that operates in the state trying to control or trying to, own slaves, that America are the biggest privateers of prison, because America, there are 2.5 million people on a daily basis confined in prison, and then there's another 7.5 million who are on some type of direct or indirect probation. So you have a large group of people who are impacted by prison. So for us to focus on just one individual or just a group of individuals in our country and not go outside of the borders of our country and see that we all have one common objective, that we all working together, that we can eliminate, we can shed light on some of the stuff that's going on. Even now, what is going on in the States as a result of the efforts that people have been doing. There are hearings after hearings in legislative chambers now, speaking with regards to solitary confinement and the impact that prison has, on the population. So the conversation is out there, and the wind is at our back. But we have to think in terms of going beyond America, because it's happening here, it's happening there, it is happening everywhere. And so our focus, while it is indeed Herman and Albert, my two comrades who remain now, in prison 40 years, and they understand this. We have always been inclusive, and we will continue to be inclusive. And we understand this, that there is a need for it.
The same thing. I mean, like Robert is saying, I mean, we were inside prison and we've seen all these things that did happen. We can still remember the beatings of people, the cries of those who've gone insane, and all the problems. And these things stay with you. I don't think it's easy to leave them and forget them. And I think anyone who was in my condition would have done the same. When we left prison, we saw how everything, when we came out here, was completely different. The stories that they said, the misrepresentation, the powerful. America is a big state. It's powerful. It has Hollywood, and it has people who do public relations and things, and they can change people's mind, and they can do much into publicity in a way that we can't do anything like. And we were completely, when we were inside prison, we completely silenced. Our voices were not heard outside. And even the things that they say about what was happening, about things that do happen, take place inside, was completely misrepresented, sometimes falsehood, sometimes just made us look like bad people, beasts, things like that, insane people, crazy people, terrorists, and so on. And it was difficult because when you leave, many people have aspirated, think that you will be able to put their voices across, and it is easy. It's not easy. When I left prison first, I was silenced I couldn't speak to any media, nor make any interviews, for about 1 year, more than 1 year. And then started to feel more guilt because of the people we left behind, like Shakar Amir and many others. And every time you remember them, still 10 years inside prison, you still feel you haven't done enough. And because of that makes us have to do something, even we're not capable of. We don't have the ability. We never thought of ourselves able to stand up and talk in front of people like this, or to the media. We're not articulate like other people who might be more articulate than us. But we think it's something that we have to do because there's no one else that can give accurately the story. I've seen once Channel 4 who tried to make cells similar to Guantanamo, and treatment similar to Guantanamo. It was so bad, but it wasn't bad enough as Guantanamo. And that's why, because of that, it's just, sometimes it's all, you have to do your best to tell what is going on inside Guantanamo. Thank you.
Thank you both very, very much for sharing all these thoughts with us. And as I say, we would love to talk more, and people will ask you questions later. Thank you.